Hi everyone, Alexandra from Craftworld Studio, aka Mrs. Craftworld, is here with you today. And as you can see, today's model is Gruber von Drakenhof, custom character created, converted by Marco, and he was using many Warhammer skeleton bits to create this cool little guy. Because today I will show you how to paint bones. Of course, next to that you will see the process of painting this project and you will see the whole process, but today's focus is on painting bones and I will go through a few steps showing that. I will show you painting bones in different ambiances. For example, I will focus on the upper part of the model to be in that kind of nightly colder, more like bluish tones, and the lower part to be more in natural and muddy tones. And let's see how it all goes. The colors that you can see on the palette are red, sienna amber, Prussian blue, yellow, and primary blue. So let's start with blocking some color in a focal area, and I will focus on explaining the triangle composition that we were talking about in some previous tutorials. And I will just sketch these 3 points of yellow on the helmet, on the axe, and on the shield. And as you can see, this doesn't even make sense at this point, but it makes sense to me because it's the process of planning and inspiration I'm getting from putting this paint there. So as you can see, it is in triangle, and I started adding the colors first on 3 spots and then showing you how I can add it on the path of these 3 spots of yellow color. So it will catch some of the face, it will catch somewhere on the shoulder pad, it will catch the torso, the little pike on the helmet. And this is not the tone of, let's say, at this point, this yellow is not like sun or some OSL from magic or anything. It's just the first tone that I'm starting it in this underpainting. It is a tone that will help me bring other tones in the next process, more in the hue that will push forward from blues that I'm planning to have around, and it will be something that is more striking and attract the eye. So I'm just starting with that. So the idea I'm having at the start now at this moment will change through next steps probably many times. It will have the focus that I'm starting with, and at the end it will go there, but I want to have these colors help me search and explain, because I don't know what I will get at the end with just like I don't have plan how it should look at the end. I have some initial idea and I want these colors and mixes and variations to help me bring it to this point and maybe even further. As you can see now, I'm adding blue tone and I'm getting some more greenish tones like turquoise in between this yellow and blue. And I'm focusing still on keeping this all in one focus. So I'm going slowly. I'm just adding this blue tone. I'm mixing it a bit. I will probably in next layers change something, but let's start with this. I'm kind of framing the face with this blue. So I added a bit here. I'm going around the yellow on the shoulder pad, and I will also move it through the place where I put the yellow, and I will bring more yellow there and get that greenish tone. And it's already started mixing, so it started pretty simply with just one color, then I add a second one, and I'm starting to mix these colors on the model. You can see I mix them a bit on the palette depending on what tone I need, but I want to focus on having them mix and create the surface, that underpainting surface that I'm searching for on the model. Let's take a bit more blue, and as you can see, I'm lightly mixing it with yellow, and I'm get some greenish, and it's not too green, it's still blue in value. So I'm going in the level between this blue and yellow, and there is not a definitive color. There is not a definitive mix of color. Is it more blue or more yellow? I'm just trying to search and explain those variations as they happen on the model. And don't worry, if some tone is not to your liking that you get during this painting, you can easily change it in next layers. But the point and idea is to search for it and to create. So first thing now is like planning, sketching, blocking, searching. Everything you do in these first steps should bring you more inspiration and should be helpful for your later steps. That is why we are doing this now. So I'm going slowly. I'm kind of also building some volumes, but not so much. You can see that it's pretty soft in contrast, and that will change in next steps, but for now I'm trying to keep the values somewhat correct, and also to build these tones and search for the nice tonal value that will fit the character and inspiration I have for him. So I'm going with adding this blue tone also on the ribs, on his torso, and I'm going slowly adding them below the arm and on the other part. Probably I will go with some darker tones also because it will help me explain the volumes better there, but for now let's focus on these two tones, these two colors. You can see as I mix them more, it becomes more green, but it's not strong, it's very soft. And it still mixes and it's still wet, so when it's dry, the tones will change a bit. You should pay attention to that as well, because that's also important. Maybe you think while you're painting, maybe you think some color is too strong at the moment, but maybe it's not. Let it dry, think about it, process, and you will see if it fits or if you should paint more, add more colors or change its tonality. So let's add more blue there. You can see I'm still focusing on keeping these yellows. They're becoming green somewhere, but they're also yellow. Okay, let's work a bit more on the shield, adding more blue. So also don't hurry in the step of underpainting. You want to feel all the not painted spots, but also you want to build the tones and to really see what you're doing and to really build, you need some time of a progress. And the more you do now, it is helpful for later steps. So I'm adding this Prussian blue. Let's make these blues more darker. So focusing on the shield, bringing more contrast there, and having the plan so you can see bottom and the upper plan of the whole figure. So always thinking about the project overall, the whole figure and its ambience. I'm adding this Prussian blue in the darkest place of the model, so it's his legs and it's all behind the shield, the inner part of the torso also. So let's first focus on the parts that are easier to reach with the brush. So I'll add a bit more on the shield. I hope you can see this. Let's add a bit more Prussian blue, very softly, very gently, and yeah, so focus on the points I explained in shield exercise, light placement. Here I'm focusing also on that. I'm creating the volume of this shield, and also I'm adding the other tones and sketching, but keeping the lights on the right place on the shield and on the model, explaining that it's highlighted from one side, so we have some source of light explaining these shapes. Okay, let's add some of the sienna umber in the Prussian blue. It will make even darker tones, and I'm also shading, as I said, the inner torso, all the area below the torso and behind the shield, his legs, and I will just sketch this tone also on the cloth everywhere, because it will separate these parts of these body parts and the plants, and it will help me focus on the overall volume later. So I'm still keeping attention on the tones themselves, but also I'm keeping attention to the volumes. I'm adding more of this dark color with the browns on the shield. Let's add some red. This red will help me give some accent to the shadows, and it also will differentiate to these greenish tones that I have from above, these turquoise ones, and that will give me more of the tonal contrast. So you can see how the paint mix isn't constant. I'm getting more of the tones, and I'm not focusing on mixing too much on the palette. I'm focusing more on mixing on the model itself. And notice this transparency of the layers. They're pretty thin, not too much, they're not washes, they're not even glazes. They're very thin layer of paint that will help me have other tones from beneath visible. Also in covering the primer, I'm going thin because I want these colors to be bright. And let's add some more on the other parts of the model. Let's just focus on underpainting the whole model before going on the next details and going on bones. So I'm adding some brown for the wood. I will be adding more of this red. Let's put it here in the shadows. No, so this other skeleton is not bloody. So this is just the base color I will have in the underpainting of the one below, because he is a bit in the shadows that are accented with red. I have this sienna amber and Prussian blue, and I'm focusing on putting these tones and building some volumes on the skeleton, and also just focusing on bringing this brownish red with some blue that will make it very dark on some places on the back of the model and on the base, and just building the overall volume of the whole piece. So just filling in some shadows and creating details, a bit more red there, and that should be it. This is how it looks, and you can see that two plans of upper and the lower plan of the model, of course, and the back that I was talking about. So the main point is in the upper triangle, the axe, the shield, and the torso with head. Everything else is in that blue to make it dark, and brownish red to make it also muddy and very more in natural tones you will see in later steps, but for now very dark red, and upper part is bright turquoise. As you can see, underpainting is done. You can see how these colors look when they are dried. The red is visible somewhere, the most dominant color below is brown, and there is some pretty much visible blues in the lower shadows. So there are play of reds and blues in the shadow, it's not constant. And let's mix some paint. I have this red, sienna amber, and yellow. There is some blue as well, it becomes more greenish. And I'm searching for the starting first layer for the skeleton below. So somewhere it will go more to the brownish, these brownish reds with some greens getting back to brown, and somewhere more yellow. But I will change that in later process, so follow it in the first steps, going warm. So I'm adding this first tone that I created for the first layer on the places that will be lighted, so creating some mid-tones for the skeleton. And I'm focusing on light placement here on the upper side of the skull, on the brows, on the nose, and the upper parts, bone parts of the lip and the jaw. somewhere on the fingers and the bones of the arm that is pointed up, holding a sword, and somewhere on the ribs. Getting more of this tone, but a bit lighter. As you can see, I picked a bit more closer mix to yellow, and I am sketching the light a bit more, and I'm focusing on covering a bit less surface, but adding this lighter tone. So you can see still trying to define the ribs and the shoulder. Let's go a bit more on the skull, adding this stronger light on the upper part, somewhere on the brow and the nose and the cheekbones. Shoulder and arms. But let's make it a bit darker tone than on the head, so the head can be in better focus than the rest of the body, as it's going below, down, and focusing on bringing the viewer eyes and interest up. So let's just blend it in, and you can see as the layers are thin, it's blending in softly. So adding a bit more on the brows, making better definition there. And somewhere a bit more on the skull, creating that edge of the skull, like where it's bent. Going slowly, just keeping a bit of paint on the tip of my brush and just trying to sketch these placements where the light hits and define the highlights of this bone. And as you can see in the previous step, the layer was so thin that it wasn't almost even visible on the bristle. Now the color is a bit more visible because it is a bit more dense, and I want it to cover and to be more visible because I am highlighting these parts. But also I will add more highlights over this. Still, I want definition to be stronger. So I'm just repeating the previous steps, covering a bit less, some were covering a bit more, but still the layer, even if it's a bit more dense than the previous ones, it's thin enough so the color from below is visible. And now it's look a bit warm, and I want to bring the ambience from above, not so much visible and affecting, but a bit. So I'm going very softly with this kind of a bit muddy turquoise. So I'm mixing it with the tones that I created from the layers, previous layers, and I'm adding this turquoise, so these blues and yellows. And I'm highlighting the most important parts of the skull. So it's on the forehead, where the skull bend from the upper view, on the eyebrows, the cheekbone, the nose, the teeth, the fingers, the joints of the fingers. If it's too strong, you can just blend it a bit. The key is not to let color dry fast, because then you cannot move it, but you don't want it to be too wet. So just practice and try and learn more about how these paints react and what you can do with the brush. So I'm going a bit stronger and adding more definition, so all these details will be better visible. A bit more, just with the tip of the brush, leaving that highlights somewhere on the shoulders a bit. Maybe it's too strong, but I can bring it a bit down. Okay, with more yellowish, keeping it more in that parts that are not so much affected with the upper ambience, and then focusing on the skull to be affected with the upper ambience. Just bringing it there, and you can see there is some contrast. The bones are reflecting, but it's not so strong, it's not so shiny, and it's quite enough to keep it smooth for the bones, but also to have more tones showing that there is some decay and weathering happening. They've been some time below the ground, and you can see. So there is that mixes for the highlights of the blues, and there are these brownish and more natural tones. You can see how it all looks together, and you can see how it all looks on the palette. So on the model it looks very smooth because it was thin, and I just moved with my Bristol a bit, and I focused on just bringing definition with this light. So this skeleton below is not so much lighted, it's not in the spot where I want him to be most noticeable, but it's highlighted enough to see what it is. And you can see from above it's even better visible. So let's now focus on the upper skeleton, so the main character. And as you can see, he's pretty turquoise and pretty bright right now. So I will make something between wash and glaze. So it's more like a glaze. You can see it's not too watery, and you can see when I put it on my skin, the skin is still visible. It's pretty transparent, and I will glaze it all over the bones of the main character, because I want to bring some of the dirt and also to bring more of that natural tones to the bones. So explaining that these bones are affected by the ambience, but they still have some of their own attributes of the natural bone color, and that is pretty warm and like creamy white. So first I want to build this undertone that will help me as I go to the light tones. It will help me keep it more natural, but still keeping it in ambience as well. So as you expect, more color mixing. You can see the back are pretty much darker. Let's add this brown here as well. Okay, while it's drying, it will need some time, and it's dried on some places. I will start adding the first layer tones, and it's similar as on the skeleton below, but still keeping it more bluish greenish. So even the points that look yellow on the palette, it will look more gray green on the skeleton. If you're not sure, you can place the color on the part and see if it's not what you're looking for. You can easily remove it with the brush while the color is still wet, but also you can try just peel it from there. So I knew how this paint will look on the model, so I'm just placing it there and trying to find this tone of the bones, and I think that's the one I was searching for. So I will just add it on the places where the light hits on the torso. So this is the light placement on the torso here. I'm focusing on the middle and bringing it to some of the frontal view of the ribs. So the second plan and the views that are below the arms will stay more in shadow. And I'm going pretty quickly here because I'm already adding more layers. So while I'm saying adding more layers, it means I'm covering the layer I previously put there with more tones. And now I'm keeping this more greenish blue. So it's more to blue or more to yellow. And just there is not constant tone. And you can see that how it goes and just helps me. And it blends into other tones because they're all similar. They're from similar color mixes, and as they blend, they create more natural surface and become more grayish in some parts, somewhere more brownish. I'm going a bit more lighter on the middle, where the ribs start from this main middle bone, focusing on these bones that are going to shoulders. And you can see how the torso is starting to get the volumes also. Let's add some highlights on the shapes where the ribs bend, creating and more defining that they're bending. Adding more here, somewhere more even brownish tone like this on the arm. You can see how it looks so far. It started creating and it started getting some shape, and the tonalities look more bony now. It's similar to the one below, but it's lighter, so these tones are getting similar to the highlights of the lower skeleton, because he is in a spotlight. He is the main character and he is in the focus here. You can see the palette. And yeah, I'm adding some Prussian blue also, getting some darker tones to bring more contrast between the ribs. So if it happens to lose, to get some paint on the places where you don't want, you can just easily add some darker tones, and just don't let yourself just don't let yourself giving up because of one mistake. So there are no mistakes, just happy accident. And I know it just doesn't seem like that. It's sometimes when you work a lot and then something happens that you don't like and you don't know where to go from there. But if you don't have idea how to solve it in this time, you can just go further on the other steps and go back to this step that is annoying for you at the moment. So for me, it's all process. I would go even more quickly in painting this. I would not overthink tones so much, but when explaining, I try to bring all the tones I want and to be able to explain them and to go slowly. And that is the main idea behind this tutorial. I want you to learn how to create the material like bone, how to express it with your painting, but I also want you to focus on color mixing and how to really bring some inspiration, some idea, and how to consider ambience when painting either bones or any other material, because it is all part of the process, and by trying, by painting like this, you experience it. And let's say you're trying to paint following this tutorial, and you don't have to have the same tones as I am. You can go very similar, but you just need to focus on play of these tones and to understand why are you using them. So that's why I'm explaining here and why I'm adding more of the ambience and more tones, because I believe it is good to challenge yourself to go further, not to focus on the simple examples and simple steps, but to go further. Either you're a beginner or more experienced painter, this is for all. Maybe you can try this and go more simply. You don't have to mix this much, just focus on the volumes and try it for the first figure, then on the next add more tones, then on the third one try something, add more striking ambience, or just try and experiment, because it is important and it's all part of the progress. So let's add some color highlights, more bluish. And yeah, it looks pretty strong now, but I'm not worried. I will mix some of the yellows, some of the brownish. I will tone it down. And it's all happening on the model. You can see on the shoulder and now the arm, it looks grayish brown, and you know that I put this blue and yellow before that. But I have experience, I know where I lead this tone, and also I let the tone lead me, so I will follow. You can see how it's easily changed in the hues and variations from blue and yellow to brown, and I brought it back to blue somewhere. And I'm just playing with these mixes, just adding more, and at some point if it looks too strong, it's because I just sketch it for the volume. Just tone it down with next color. So let's mix some Prussian blue and sienna amber and add more white. It's kind of a grayish brown, so warm gray tone, and let's focus on the back highlights. So yeah, I'm adding the contrast to the back as well, but the tones are more settled down, that they're not strong, they're more natural and more grayish. So they're not in the focus, not in the first plan, they're not so striking, but when you see the back of the model, it's still defined. So just focusing on bringing, so I'm just focusing on bringing these wider highlight areas up, bringing some contrast if needed, and just adding more of this blue. Just sketching and also going pretty soft, defining. And these are mid-tones. So you know when you add these that you can go even further with highlights. Nothing too much, nothing too strong. Just very soft variations that add so much. They add story, they add definition, they add the final look, like the volume of the whole piece and the parts. So it's all explained. You can see how this skeleton is connected, like he have these shoulders and connecting ribs and stuff. Yeah, we don't know how he really works. It's a magic because he don't have any muscles, but you can still see the structures of his bones, so the anatomy is there, and you explain it with your highlights and the shadows. You can see some greenish tones appear there. So it's similar to all the tones in the front, but they are more dull, they are more gray, they're not so strong. But all the tonal values are there. So you can see all the brownish and greenish and bluish and grayish. There's some yellow there, not so strong. Just going with the flow of reflections on the bones. And the shape of reflections, so how they're manifested on the bone, is what differ it from the metal. You will see in the next progress that as well. So you can see how it looks on the front, and it looks a bit more calm on the front because the highlights are wider and there is not so much details, because it's pretty simple. It's face and torso, shoulders and arms. Let's add some highlights also on the cheekbones. So I will take this smaller brush because it will be easier to reach the model, because I'm looking it a bit from the far. Adding a bit on the eyebrows, on the nose, like on the one below that I already did. Adding a bit here. So going very thin, following the edges, a bit more than the edges, but if you're not sure where to go, focus first on the edge and then add a bit below or above, depending on what part of the mini you're painting. And still covering less surface than the previous layer, so my previous layer will be visible. If you made a mistake, you can easily remove it with a brush, of course while it's wet, but don't worry, if it dries, just take the color and cover it. Thin again, you don't want to cover the textures. As long as you go thin, you're safe. Okay, let's add some highlights here as well. Okay, just with the tip of my brush, just leaving a bit of color with the tip. And maybe this brush is not best for keeping enough paint, but it's decent, and it helps me add this tone while recording, so that's also good. So I add a bit more highlights on his beautiful smile, a bit more on the eyebrows. Go with a bit more white, and it's still not clear white, but it's highlighting still. It's lighter than the previous tones, and it helps me define his face even better. Let's add a bit more on the chest. Of course, this is risky because you don't want to attract more attention on the torso or on the other parts than on the face. But I want it to be decently highlighted. I can always add more details to the face, and he have this cool helmet, so I can add more accent with that as well. But I also want this torso and other parts to have decent and nicely explained volumes and details. You can see how it looks from different angles as well. Just adding a bit more. Defining the little bony fingers. Highlight there. Yeah. So you can see how the palette looks, and you can see there are some mixes, but even more mixes are on this model, and you can see still keeping, even with adding the details, still keeping the lower and the upper part separated. But now with the bones done, they're getting more connected as well, because you can see similar tones there. And of course the back are defined. Maybe they can have a bit more definition somewhere, but they're, again, the bones are defined, the bones are painted, but it's nothing too much. It doesn't take too much attention. Even with some few more highlights that I will add now, it will, some of these bone parts will pop out more, but still they will not take a lot of attention, because I will have some other things to do on the model. So let's add some more definition here. On the mid of the ribs, somewhere on the shoulder. Let's highlighting this arm, adding more white, making the tones brighter. So as you can see, I'm leaving like a dot or the circle with the starting of the bristle, and then I just pull it down. Okay guys, I also have one surprise for you. So this is exercise. Let's see, I'm sure we caught a lot of details on the mini as well, but let's see how it looks on the paper, and let me explain a bit more why are we doing all those underpainting and why is it helpful. So for example, how it looks in 2D painting. So when you're creating from just flat paper. On the mini you already have a three-dimensional look, but again with your paint you're really trying, especially when painting in this approach, you're trying to create and to show the volumes and the details and the ambience and the materials. So let's see how it looks when we do it on the paper. So I have a flat surface with just simple sketch that I did pretty fastly, trying to represent this character. And I will start with adding these yellows. I will not focus on being pretty neat here, because this is just the exercise, and here I will focus on just showing you how these tones also work on the bigger surface. And let's add these yellows. creating more greens and the blues, going to turquoise, just to follow the steps that we did on the model. A bit more simpler here because I still don't have all the details drawn. I will paint them. So let's add somewhere. So all these parts are in shadow, and I'm leaving the part that will be highlighted light, and then I can go with a thin layer so the paper is still visible under this paint, and then these parts look lighter. I will focus on adding a bit more, and let me sketch this underpainting quickly so I can proceed on next steps. So let's add also different underpaintings. So I will go more brownish and Prussian blue on the leg. I will go more with reds and these Prussian and greens on the this bone on the back. And let's do more green brown on the arm. So what is my next step? I have this color placed, but I need better depth to represent these parts and how they water their plants in this. So on the flat paper, I need to explain what is in front and what is in back, what is above, below, and so on. So I'm focusing on adding deeper shadows. It will help me define and put the torso up. And you can see the colors are pretty similar on the model, but on the model I already have these dark places. And of course, if you painted in lighter colors, probably you will define them with some darker tone. Depending on your underpainting, it doesn't have to go too dark, but let's just sketch some of the shadows here. And if you remember, on the model I went with glaze of this brown, so I'm just do the sketches of shadows with a brush here. So doing this practice pretty, not focusing on creating this character in all its glory, just showing the shadows and the tones there, but just add a bit more, creating that ribs, so on. So as you can see, I'm also adding some lighter version of this brown gray with more blues and reds. It's very soft, and I am sketching around this, creating more tones of darker shades and some place for the mid-tones as well. And let's start defining the lights on the face. I'm adding more white, and it will be so much harder on the paper to really go to the lightest tones, because the paper will take in the water from the color, and the color will be more darker. On the figure, the color will look darker if the layer is thin, but then when it dries, it will change the tone, and if you go more dense, it will look lighter. On the paper, it's a bit harder because it will constantly take in the water, and it is a bit of different process, but it's good for practice anyway. So let's add highlights on the places where it should be. So as we said, the cheekbones, brows, nose, he don't have nose, but he have a bone of a nose, the jaw, let's make that pretty smile visible. Just going, adding more of the light tones than the previous ones. So I was focusing on bringing tones there, to defining the shades, and now I'm focusing on defining the places of light. So first getting to mid-tones and then variations in these mid-tones, and then continuing bringing it to highlights. So I hope you can see now on this sketch that there are many different tones of these mid-tones of the bones. So you can see this grayish with more brown, with more green, more blue. So let's point some of them. So these are more brownish, this is more bluish, more with the yellow, it's lighter, and this darker one. And you can see they're all pretty soft pastel, but again dirty, so they're not too much saturated. They look saturated because they're on this underpainting and they're all together, but again, when you're looking at the main points of these mid-tones, they're pretty soft, and they, even with having these colors, it just helps getting more harmony in the reflections on the bones, but they're pretty gray and pretty soft. So focusing on volume also. Lights are on the middle and on the middle of the torso, and let's say on the middle of the ribs where they bend. It is the same on the other side as well. a bit more darker. Also this part is covered a bit with the arm and shield, but let's on this sketch add some more highlights to define them a bit more and to explain how it looks. And I'm going with clear white here because it's on paper. As you could see on the model, it doesn't require that depending on the lightest tone and how much you're satisfied with. So let's say if this shadow is this pretty blue below the arm, you can have some of the blue lights also there to highlight it in the shadow, but not so much and not so visible. Let's define some of the bones here as well. Getting more shades on the arm so the fingers can be more visible. And you can see how much the tones changed with this constant layering and overlapping of the tonal transparent layers, and they are creating these new tones, and in the progress you're building volumes, and just go softly, and it makes the creation of these harmonious tones of layers that are creating and defining the material the viewer is looking at, and that is bones in this case. So let's add some more tone on this part of the back of the skeleton. So on the bone I'm creating more contrast, and I'm focusing on having more of these kind of greenish mid-tones, greenish gray, and with the browns that all look pretty soft, dirty green, gray, brown. And I'm going with some highlights that are still in this greenish value, and I'm adding some brush strokes to create the more feeling of how this bone looks, so it's not something just smooth and without any texture. So it has some textures, it has some shape and look, and I'm trying to define it with the tones here and with the brush strokes. So this was too small on the model to actually explain, so I think this is a good opportunity to show it on paper. You can see how these brush strokes are helping me create the shape, even if it was just a wide shape of this bone. It's helped me define how it is defined in the ambience and what plans this bone have like where is it bending and what is the deeper or more pointed part of this bone. And you can see how this brush is moving and help me like mix this paint and also leave more pigment on the edges. This can be achieved on the model also on some wider parts, but depending on the scale. So you don't need too much dense paint on some smaller minis. So if you're practicing this, you can do it on paper or on some bigger or let's say wider area of the model. So I'll just go and quickly put more definition, repeating these mid-tones and highlights, and also bringing some shadows down to create the deepness, like depth, and a more three-dimensionally look to these bones. And as you can see, I played with different tones, but also bringing them to this more dirty, grayish look, but still lighted over all the tones I have. Describing different ambiances, but also describing the material and focusing on defining it in the but also help defining it. So I'll just proceed adding more highlights and shadows, and let's see how it all looks. So let's add some more tones and shade other parts of, for example, his axe and the armor parts and the shield, so we can see how we can change the tones and we can use the ambience from this underpainting. So let's add more. As you can see, I had been shaping and making some volumes with the underpainting, but now I'm focusing on adding, for example, here on the X, I'm focusing on adding the reflections of the dark. So not all on the metals are shadows and highlights. I like to call them all reflections. So this is the material that is pretty reflective, and it reflects all the shades it shows, it reflects all the lights. And here I'm focusing on bringing the better volume and contrast to the details and parts of the shield, but still keeping the overall value that and volume that I was creating previously in underpainting phase. Of course, to show all the details, I need to shade more and to add more of these darker surfaces. But I have the main look of the object, and now I am focusing on its parts and details, keeping the main look. And if it happens that it's lost during the process, if you're taking photos of your work in progress, you can see if the achievement you had previously was good. You can see what you can bring back to make it look good again, or you can try to build it further, to watch your model from some distance and see maybe if it needs more definition to something, or if some part of the mini looks like it doesn't belong to it. So it all can happen, and it's the part of the progress and practice. But for now, I'll just focus on bringing some, let's say, variations of tones in the mid-tones, because these mid-tones are the point of the mini that is between shadows and lights. So those are all tones between the darkest one that you have here and the lightest one. So in this case, those are the mid-tones between this mix of Prussian blue red and sienna amber, and this yellow, Naples yellow and primary blue. So I'm bringing a bit more brown into this mix and Prussian blue to create it look more grayish, because I have this yellow and reds also there. And when all these tones mix together, I'm getting some grayish value. But also you can see that the tones are not completely mixed, so I'm getting different variations of this gray. Let's go with some more brighter tone, more of this greenish. And yeah, I noticed that this part is not in focus, but I will just keep it for the sake of adding more of this, let's call it light placement on this shield. So I will just keep it to show you how I sketched it, and let's go to the other steps. So the focus is back, and as you can see, I was adding more lights to highlight, or let's say add light placement and create midtones of the shapes on the shield. But I was also adding more of the shadow tones below the edges of the shapes, creating the depth between them and defining how they look. So for the final definition, I will need to play more with these lights and darks, but in this process, I'm just building it and searching for the good amount of light tones and dark tones to create a good look on this shield. So it will be pretty light in this edge. And let's say this is some silvery shield, it's very reflective here. You can see how I'm building this contrast, but it's very soft. And then I have this striking, like very strong point between light and dark on the little rivets and on some edges, and these little pikes on the end. And with some strong and sharp edges like this, I will have more definition, but because of the overall shape and look, I will have to explain it better. So it's just the process. I'm adding this. If it's too strong, I will blend it a bit more, but to be sure and to really go into this process, I would need to add it and just go from there, like bring this sketch and just blend it, make it fit better, or just paint over that. So in this case, I'm searching for the tone, not to be too white. And also, I don't want it to be too yellow. I'm adding this yellow, but if I go too yellow, it will take all the accent from the face. So I don't want that. I have my triangle of yellow. It's still visible, not so much, but it's underneath and it helps me with these tones. And I don't want it to be too white, but I want it to be light enough. Let's focus on the X as well. So I will keep this shadow reflection in the middle. I will have some colder lights on the lower bottom of the blade and some warmer lights, keeping that yellow on the uh, upper part of the blade. Let's create some tones on the X part where it's the same material as the blade, but it's the flat part of the X. Let's bring more edge highlight. So I'm also getting the idea from this process because I can see how these tones react one next to another, how much contrast can I get with them, and I'm trying to just build it from there and make this X shiny and also having interesting tones. So focusing on explaining the shapes as well. So we have this flat shape, we have the blade, we have this round shape that is on the holder, and you have this back shape, sharp shape of the edge also. So adding some light also on the edge of the flat shape, making not that strong, but also keeping, it's giving definition. There is like a break point where this blade bends, and I want to shape it to make it look sharper, to show there is an edge. So I'll just continue adding highlights now when I have it defined. These highlights will make even more definition and probably change some things, but first let's focusing on adding them. So as you can see, these edges and strong lights help me make this blade sharper. It will put this X also in more focus. It's pretty reflective, and it's very sharp. So I will go almost to clear white to define this. So this is how the shield and axe looks. And I will continue highlighting all the other places, and let's see how it all looks, just focusing on the same process. And as you know from the sketch of underpainting, you will know where the light placement on the helmet and the shoulder pad will be. So this is how it looks done. You can see that the light placements are mostly on the points where I focused with the yellow sketch at the start. And you can see that also axe, shield, shoulder pad and helmet, they're all shiny. They are from the same metal material, but also I want to bring more focus to the helmet. So I will make this spike golden, and I will add some more details. Also, let's just paint it more and bring some tones there. And you can see how the bones and the metals, it all have the same tonal mixes, but they're placed a bit differently and they're mixed a bit differently, and it all makes a big change. Let's add some mix for the gold as well. I'm mixing this red into ochre with green, this maple yellows and green and browns, making it more dull, but also the yellow is pretty strong, so it's so much visible. Let's add a bit there. I will also sketch some more parts, and for you guys to see how I will place the tones and how I will sketch the light placement, and then I will just refine it all before showing you the final look. But I wanted you to follow the whole process as much possible, so you can see how the difference between these materials is made. So let's add some more red on the cloth. I'm focusing on bringing it on the placement where the light hits. Let's mix some brown tone for this broken shield on the base. I want it to be more greenish brown. Going very soft to keep the underpainting I have there. Oh, that's pretty soft. Let's add some highlights on the wood as well. Nothing too much, but it will add more definition. Let's sketch this metal part, and let's add some more of the colder, like colder edge of the steel on the border of the shield. So let's just add it to all the places that light would hit, and that means I will add it to places that will help me create the contrast, so around the rivets and on the edge. I will add also a bit more of orangey kind of bronze tones to the armor of the under skeleton, the skeleton that is on the base. sketch it and keeping the contrast. Again, on the metal, the contrast is what it helps you define these reflections and helps you make it more shiny. Again, I will not go too strong. And this is sketch. I will probably add some more tones in refining, but let's just add some more tones also here. And see how quickly you can get contrast. So I have darker, mid, and highlight. With just 3 tones you can get good contrast if you know how to place light and how to define, because that is the most important with this. It is important to define the shapes and to define the... So first is to give the volume and define the shape. Second is to create a good amount of tones that will describe the ambience where this piece is in, and also you want to describe the material you're showing. You want to give more informations with the brush strokes and the paints and the tonal values. Let's do more of sketching on the base. So I'll go with this kind of light brown, more greenish, and then add more shades of the blue. So I went only on the edge of this rock base, and these reds. Again, I have this play of reds and blues in the shades. I'm going more with this kind of grayish brown, now adding more red. Just using the brush to create some texture on the rock as well. Let's add some brownish on the branches also. You can see on my finger how the tone look. It's not too light, but I will have also lighter tones to define the branches. So just taking more yellow, adding highlights. I will need a bit more white because everything on the back side, because of the underpainting, is darker. Of course, I will not go too light. That's why I did the underpainting in darker tones. Bit more there. Some texture for the wood here. So I will just keep on refining all these parts that I showed you on the video, and come back with a final revealment of this character and how it all looks all together, following the approach and the techniques and steps I showed you previously. And let's see how he looks. So I present you Gruber von Drachenhof in the very nice ambience. So you can see all the tones from palette are mixed in different variations. I added some greens at the end also on the base to add some moss and also to give a bit more life to the base as well. But you can see how the colors are a bit more natural. Disregarding the reflections on the metals. I like to keep these metals really interesting, and you can see how on the pizza bowl the colors are more striking, therefore it attracts more attention. Hope you enjoyed one more tutorial. Thank you for being with us. Leave some comments. We always enjoy reading your feedback. Do some practices and tag us using our hashtag and tagging us on social media so we can see your works. And all the best wishes from Marco and me. See you with more tutorials. Stay tuned as more is coming soon. One more thing. If you like this and other tutorials and teachings from our Patreon, and you feel like these lessons could be useful to your friends and more people from miniature painting community, don't hesitate to share your opinion and links to our Patreon teaching platform to help us get better reach and expand our community here. Thank you. Bye bye.